Hello. Okay, so just to start off, is there anything that you guys would like to review from last time or just in general that you're maybe not as strong on as far as the commands go? No? Everyone's comfortable with everything? Because again, we've covered the majority of the major commands like I've mentioned. So at this point now it's just about refining your understanding of each command and understanding how to apply it. This is why I keep stressing that you guys, if at all possible, please give Woody some things that are applicable to you for your discipline, because it is a little bit difficult for us that aren't part of the sort of petroleum stream to fully understand what application you guys might need in the future. Just because a lot of my experience draws on architectural work, civil, mechanical, that type of drawing package. Those are the things I'm a little bit more well versed in. So again, a lot of our examples and ways of using AutoCAD always fall back to being geared towards those. So for the best experience for all of you to get the most out of this course, we still do have a couple more weeks. And if you do give me some material, I can actually come up with something fairly quick to see how it's best applicable to that. But we are definitely running very short of time, and we do still want to leave a little bit of time to get you guys prepped for the certification. So. Let's just check with our online group.
All right. So I think today we're just going to continue on a little bit with our annotations table. So, or sorry, annotation ribbon. Just going to bring up an old drawing just for. Oh, wrong one. Actually, this one will work. Where's mine? That's a little more complete. All right, how many of you guys are familiar with the concept of revision drawings? So right now, everything that you are drawing in AutoCAD is your first draft, so to speak. So typically, companies will use either an alpha or a numeric way of numbering their versions. A lot of times, in good practice, you will have something that is a draft in a letter series simply for approvals. So what that means is you're going to be creating a drawing set, and typically in your title block, just open up something here. Oh, which one had my title block in it? Let's go for this one, for example. Right here. So a lot of times your drawings are going to have this block here called your revision block. So this is not necessarily something complicated that we have to draw out today. I just want to cover this aspect so that you understand what revisions are. In this block, you will typically have a letter if it's your first draft, and it's meant for your customer to approve, whether that is a consulting engineering company or even just a client that needs you to draft up a block that you wanted shaped out of something, and you want to see that that is the correct thing you are going to produce. So that's what's done in a letter series typically. So it'll start off with A, B, C, and it'll continue on. It sounds like a very simple concept, but tracking your revisions is actually a very important thing. Kind of mentioned before, if you were to build something with the wrong revision, it would be your fault, essentially. There's no other way to put it. If you were awarded a job and you pulled the wrong revision, it could be the difference of you perhaps cutting a hole too big on the wrong location, or if this was a civil plan, if you had the wrong lines laid out for a property line, that can cause all sorts of tax implications, right? So no matter your industry, revisions are very important to keep track of. And a lot of times they're done with a very simple block. So as you can see here, all it's calling out is number, revision/issue, and the date this happens on. Again, I'm still trying to get some more real-life examples that I'm allowed to bring in. The drawing packages I have access to are through my company, and I have to find out the right way to bring them in, because we have access to those drawing packages because we're part of a construction association in Edmonton. So there's groups like the ECA, the Edmonton Construction Association, and once you have won bids, you will actually see revision tables very similar to this, and they will say issue for tender, So just as important as it is for you to understand how to save your revisions, it's also important to understand how you are getting information from other people. So again, this is not a very complicated part of AutoCAD because it could be something as simple as a small letter here, A. Let's make this a little bigger. Let's go, where are we? A little too big. There we go. First draft. Ooh, what happened there? Try that again. First draft. And let's go 18-18-06. There we go. That's not quite correct, but just for demonstration purposes, right? So what would happen is you would release this first draft. This may go to your client. They will review your drawing package. As things continue to change, this would then become a higher rev or revision. So this would be revved up. So this would become the second draft. And let's say this was, we're traveling to the future now, so let's say this is tomorrow. Something like that. That will continue on. As you can see, this is a very long stretch of revisions that are available, because a lot of times, especially the larger the project, the more revisions that will be required. If you can imagine something like a City of Edmonton job may have 10 different revisions because of all the different departments that are involved, and typically government jobs are a little bit more difficult to work with. So as your client needs change, perhaps the first draft was what they envisioned. The second draft, there were lots of restrictions due to the natural layout of land, or your client had a change in specs for something. Your revisions will continue to rev up. Once you have passed your draft stage, and like I said, there's something called issue for tender, a lot of times your numbers may change. Again, this is very industry specific and company specific of how you want to track these. But some companies will then choose to go to a numbered system. So this is more of a manufacturing setting, but a lot of times it may change to something like this, where it becomes a numbered series. And this may become issued for production now. So this is not a very dynamic system. It is something that just is manually edited within AutoCAD at least. There are other programs that do actually have, and some actually versions of AutoCAD, they have a system where the revisions are linked a little bit more intelligently. So there's ways to roll up your revision and actually have it shown in across all your drawing packages. So as we mentioned, when you're in layouts, this is typically where your actual drawing package would be. So within sheet 1 all the way through 10 of that one package, your revisions need to be consistent all the way through. So within AutoCAD right now, the way it's set up on the version that we're using, you would manually go through and edit that one by one. So very important that you keep track of changes like that, but be aware of what a revision system is. Are there any questions about how revisions work or what they really are? Is it good? So it's something as simple as even you've released something, and let's say it's a product line. If there was something wrong with the product, you would then perhaps have to make a new version of the same product but correct those mistakes. That would also be tracked within a revision table. They would perhaps rev it up to a revision 1 because things have already been released for production. There's nothing wrong, so to speak, but product improvements perhaps. So relocated hold position. Something like that. That would be cause for a revision. Again, this is coming down to your company standards, but a lot of times if the physical object has never changed, you do not revise your revision number. But if there's a dimension or anything missing, because as we practiced previously on annotations, it's easy to miss things, right? It looks like you have everything covered, so we've been, for example, looking at this. Let's say I had forgotten to do that, and only, oops, too many. Let's say I had left that out. Can I properly build this?
Yes.
But wasn't that last dimension important, right? So this dimension that I just deleted, oops, here, is actually quite important, right? Because I don't actually have a reference from the end. So what I was getting at though is, let's say I'd left that off, depending on how your company wants to handle revisions. Could you imagine if every time you left out a little dimension, you had to change your revision across all your packages? It might be a little bit time consuming and perhaps not worth the effort, because you have to think also any changes and all the modifications you're making are a cost to your company. So what happens typically, there's ways of getting information without having to cause all those ripple effects. A lot of times you can quickly actually just modify the one drawing by adding that dimension, but you have not modified your part. Now that part could be a building, it could be a block of metal, it could be a number of things. So you've not modified the actual thing you're building, so you're allowed to make these additional changes without revving up your package. So this is more just understanding the business of drawings. So yes, it's not technically something we need to learn for AutoCAD, but like we mentioned before, this course we're hoping it's going to be more than just teaching you how to draw lines. So how that really plays into effect is, if you are required to make changes to your drawing, but they do not affect the actual part that was originally modeled. So again, this is more just the layout space where you've perhaps added a few things, added details. You do not necessarily have to revise your entire drawing package. So it's a time-saving thing. And a lot of times those are handled by something called RFIs, requests for information. So your client, your sub-client, so let's say you've now you've been awarded the job to draft up a building, you've now released it to subcontractors to go ahead and build. As a subcontractor, a lot of times you actually ask the consulting engineers or your general contractors for an RFI to request that little piece of information. In this case, that 11 and 11/16 dimension I just deleted, as if it was, you know, missing. An RFI would handle that. Now, if you want to help signify things like that, if you look on Annotate, there's something called a revision cloud. So if you click over there, this is a way to actually help mark up your drawings. So if you've ever seen a drawing package that has something like that, a lot of times it is handled just specifically for true revisions, but sometimes people will use that for signifying what an RFI is about as well. It's just to draw your attention to something. So they do call it specifically a revision cloud, and there's different ways of drawing them: rectangular, polygonal, or freehand. So this is more of the art of marking up drawings. So this is after you've completed your package, your model space is all done, you've annotated everything, and this is now handling later revisions. Now, because of how AutoCAD works, this is where you have to also handle your save as options a little differently. So we've talked a little bit about file format, right? Right now we're saving everything to one single .dwg file. This is when you would need to start creating archival systems. Now, there are very dedicated file management systems, and oops, I'm just going to call that archive actually. Archive. So let's say we call this, save that in there. I'm saving away my original. Get rid of that, actually. And back in this one, I will call this grab A, for example. So just looking at that of A. So right there, because unfortunately AutoCAD is unable to store any deeper information, as you can see within here, there's no revision tab under your Windows properties. What people will do, companies will do, they'll actually pay for different companies now to create a file management system. Autodesk has one, SolidWorks has one. There's even third-party companies that have specifically file management systems that handle revisions because they are that critical. There is only so much intelligence in a single .dwg file, and there's, like I just showed you, ways to show things like revisions and things that may have happened, but they are all handled internally. What a lot of third-party companies will actually do is write additional attributes into that file package so that you can actually track more complex comments about things that have changed within your drawing package. And you would use things like your balloons, or sorry, clouds, like so. Oops. Things like this, just to show things that may have changed on your drawing package. More critically is when there's an actual change to your part. So let's say this is now no longer the table style they wanted, and let's go here. Okay, let's go radius. So that's a fairly drastic change to my model, isn't it? That's fairly easy to see, but perhaps someone worked on this without realizing that that had changed. This is when you would use your revision clouds. So, draw the way I wanted. There we go. So as you can see, you can drop them down very simply and just shape them as you need. They're essentially a set of polylines, right? If you recognize that look. It's just polylines that you just stretch and form as needed. There are different ones where you can actually have polygonal ones, and you just continue drawing in whatever shape you want to cover anything that might have changed. Like so. So very simplistic command, but it's important to understand what that means and the importance of what revisions are. So this is sort of touching into something beyond AutoCAD altogether, but depending on how you track your revisions, there's also things such as engineering change notices that are actually full documents that actually document all your changes. Because again, this all comes down to cost of services. It might sound simple. I need you to modify this little plate because they wanted rounded corners. What if down the road someone had already used that table and expected sharp cornered edges because they were going to mount something to it? The ripple effects of your changes are not always easily apparent, especially if you are working at the stages of only detailing this table, for example, and a whole different department was now in charge of your assembly stage. So understand how that your one revision is not just your one revision. A lot of times it is a ripple effect of other things that could be affected. So the importance of revisions is high. The simplicity of what the concept of revisions are is very simple, and as you can see, it could just be quite something as simple as this. I relocated the whole position, but if you relocated the whole position of this, you just bumped it over for whatever reason, that is now shifting that motor that we had drawn onto our building table, right? Which then may perhaps affect whatever's connected to that motor, whatever's being driven. So if I had shifted this over, just like my revision comment said there, somewhere over there, and it's almost twice the distance over now, it looks fine, right? My motor's still gonna fit. But if you remember back to what we had learned, this motor had the drive shaft pointed in towards the table. So typically that motor will be driving something else. So what if I typically needed the full remainder of this table to support whatever I was driving? That one little change that you thought was fine to do might have the effect of you no longer having room to support your following assemblies. So within AutoCAD, unfortunately, there's no way to have intelligence to push data up. There are ways of linking information. We're going to get into that a little bit later about how to have editable attributes within title blocks and different parts of the drawing. But it does get a little bit more difficult to see the relationships between drawings. And that's another big reason why, depending on how you're drafting, whether you're drafting within one model space or having multiple drawings, can either affect you, will affect how you can see the changes. So when you draw within one model space, even the way I drew it here, I drew it as though that there were different sections. If you guys remember that. The only true way to see all the ripple effects within one view would be if I drew everything in this one type of view here. And some of you guys chose to do it this way. You went through and created multiple layers, right? Created maybe 20, 30 layers, so that there was a layer just for your beams, a layer for your table, layer for your motor. By doing so, you actually may have protected yourself within any changes that could have happened, because you would only be dealing with one model space view. Whereas the person that perhaps did it this method, I created a table here, and then I created a table and motor assembly here. Right there, you can already see the problems. I modified the one view, but the next view is not changed. So this is already the broken link. So this is more about drafting concepts, right? Drafting concepts and how they can affect your revisions. If there's no direct relationship here, then you would not know. If you were to take your drawing and release it here again, not realize that the original cut drawing has been so heavily modified. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind, how you approach drafting and how you will perhaps do your designs. So yes, it may be more complicated, making 20, 30 layers and then handling your layout space and start turning on and off your layers by freezing, because just last class someone brought that up. They were asking how to freeze, right? That's where if you were working with one model and throw specific layers away, you could perhaps protect yourself to some degree. Of course, this is within reason. If this was a multi-storied downtown building that covered 2 blocks, it might get a little bit unwieldy to draw everything in one drawing, in the sense that it's one single model space, and try to handle 200 layers or something. I'm not sure what the maximum limit is. Yeah, do you know the limit of layer count for AutoCAD? It's pretty high, but you can imagine if you drop this down and try to manage that many layers, it may become counterproductive at some point, right? It might go too far the other end, to the other way, where it's no longer reasonable to modify. So you have to balance all of that, and a lot of times your company will have those standards set. And of course, there are programs that are a little bit more powerful than AutoCAD when it comes to handling such complex projects. AutoCAD is very strong in what it does, but like I had mentioned before, certain manufacturing companies will use different 3D programs. Certain civil companies, once they reach a certain size, will go to something like a Revit program, which is an Autodesk product too. So it's essentially the next step of AutoCAD, but allows more information to be put in their models and models within a 3D style space. Even though AutoCAD does have 3D capabilities, they are a build-up of what AutoCAD was, and not necessarily a dedicated 3D program. So a little bit different. This is something that's a very simple command. It's called Wipeout. At times people will use this to hide information. So I'm not sure if you have had much experience with AutoCAD, Adobe, with Adobe, but they have options such as redact. So that's when you need to hide certain information for whatever reason. So if there's proprietary information that you do not need your client to see for their aspect of the job. So let's say you are bidding out a job and have certain discipline that you do not need to share pieces of information with. That's what this wipeout command does. So these are just markup tools. Again, this is more your post-drawing phase area. So wipeout will allow you to hide things out. And really all of this comes down to, because right now, because I'm in AutoCAD, I can just go ahead and delete this, right? So if you were to send your client an AutoCAD file, that would not really protect your drawing package by wiping it out. Or throwing revision in clouds, they could easily just delete things. What we haven't really spoken too much about is actually plotting. So plotting is AutoCAD's terminology for printing. A lot of times you will just be printing to a small printer, because most people only have 8.5 by 11. So we talked briefly about this, but there's something called the page setup. So if you guys type in page, it'll bring you to page setup. This is where you control your different layers. Down here, this is where it will talk about if you already have a device set up for your plotter and the size that you're actually going to be printing out. If you go to modify, this brings up a page setup properties menu. So for example, if we just go click down on name, there's plenty of options down here. At home, you might have a couple options. You might have Adobe PDF, you might have your printer, you know, your HP or Canon or whatever printer you may have at home. And there's going to be a few other publish options. There's ways to even publish straight to web. I haven't played with those too much. Typically, you're printing to PDF. That's a very common format. So just for practice, you can go to Adobe PDF, and a few options will now turn on. So within here, if you go to properties right beside your name, this might bring up very familiar things. This is sort of the stuff you would be printing to for your assignments in school, right? If you're printing something to PDF just to help protect your document. And these are going to be very similar settings to printing to any kind of standard printer as well. Now, once you have set your properties in here, so let's change some properties. So if you go to custom properties, you can choose what you want this to be printing to. So right now it was set to letter. If you want, you can go to 11 by 17 for a bigger printout. Typically I like landscape. So under layout, you can change your landscape or portrait views. So again, this is very dependent on your industry, but most drawing packages are printed out in landscape. Rarely will you see drawing packages printed out in portrait. It's just not a common view of seeing drawings done in across all disciplines that I've seen. So electrical schematics, piping schematics, electrical ladder diagrams, mechanical manufacturing drawing packages, or even construction packages. They're always typically landscape. And color, it's nice to have, but just realize that the first time someone needs to photocopy something, all your color information is gone. A lot of times, right? Unless your person has a color photocopier. But a lot of companies don't have that luxury. They have black and white laser. So using color may be nice for your drawing. Again, good in the model space for you to differentiate layers and its properties. But just realize once you actually get to the print and plot stages, you may be able to plot to a color PDF, but you won't always have that option of plotting to color paper. And that's what people need to work with in this day and age still, unfortunately. You know, as much as technology is very prolific, and there are companies actually building from tablets. So there are actually certain construction companies that have a standard actually. So a local company such as PCL actually has tablet requirements. So on site you will actually carry around a tablet for your build. So your site foremans across all your subtrades will have digital prints. So that's how they handle their technology, or sorry, their plots through technology. So instead of everyone carrying full massive size D size plots, they're now carrying it all within a tablet. So kind of nice to see, you know, technology make its way into the construction world. But in case you don't have that option, you'll be printing black and white. So back to the Adobe PDF settings. There's other settings you can throw in. There are ways to actually secure your documents. So this is getting more into if you're a PEng or a P-Tech and you are required to stamp your drawings within the PEGA and asset guidelines, there are guidelines for digital stamping. So how that works, check with your association as far as what the current standards are, but there is the ability to get a digital beaver here in Canada, in Alberta these days. So if you choose the digital stamp, there are ways to integrate it. I believe it does not go through Adobe at this point. You have to use a separate software, from what I remember, for the digital stamp for PEGA. And then asset, the gear stamp, I can't quite remember what they're using right now. Myself, I have not had to deal with the stamping, so that will be something you'll have to discover on your own. Once you've done all that though, you can actually save your properties. So after I finished my custom properties, I said okay. As you can see, there's a couple of changes now, right? The green check marks, they've shown the things that I have modified. I can save this as something that I can draw upon later. So let's just call this EHTC plot. As you can see, that it has a different extension, .pc3. So the .pc3 standard is the plot settings. I'm just going to save that. Now, if I were to save this and bring it to another computer, perhaps you are setting up a new computer altogether and you didn't have them networked yet, but you wanted the same plot settings, or this is the plot setting across your company and everyone needs to bring it to their local, you can then actually import those PC3 settings. Oh. Settings again. Down here, this is also where you can change things for an individual print. So within the paper size, you have all those different options again. So this would be plotting off that one time you need to plot, not necessarily using a preset setting. Down here, there's different options as far as what you're printing. So you can print display, quite literally what you can see. So as you can see in the background space, what I can see is what it will print. So that's plot display. Right? It had a part of that actually cut off, so that's what you get to print. That is printing one-to-one scale. So if for some reason you need it to scale very specifically, on the drop down here, this has all the different scales. There's also fit to paper and the ability to punch in your own units. Typically, you want to be printing extents if scale does not matter to you, and you just need to make sure you're capturing everything within your drawing. This is actually a nice check, because sometimes if we print extents, and let's say I went fit to paper, that's good. That's sort of everything I drew on that one part. But remember how we kind of talked about, let's say, we drew something. Oh, that's not a good example. Let's see. If you had drawn something way over here, just like when you're drawing a new viewport, it will capture everything. So let's say you didn't quite notice that. So if I went extents here, it will catch whatever is pushing the extents of your drawing. So this also means within paper space. So back to extents. So within your paper space, it will also print to that maximum extents. So it will help you catch any mistakes or things that are drawn in, by accident. So extents is a nice way to check that sometimes. Below extents is layout. So this will print exactly what is on your layout space. And window lets you print specific selections. Let's change that window just so you guys can see. So I only had a small window there, and just snap those, that little part of the model. That's all it's going to print. Any questions about the print window? This all seems fairly simple, and right now it's hard to sort of see the things that can go wrong, but just be very careful with your setting selections. It may all seem right now, like I said, quite easy, but the very first time you happen to print your drawing with the wrong scale onto very large paper, and if it is perhaps a 100-page package, that's when you may not feel so great about yourself. It's happened to very many people I've known working in the industry when they have, not saying they printed 100 pages wrong, but they have printed things wrong. It's that final step that a lot of people overlook because it's so simple. How do you get it wrong? But you do. Things happen. There is always this preview option here. So again, so just plot. This preview shows you exactly what will be showing up on your page. So this red border, all this, everything in here, this is exactly how it will look. So just use all these different options to your advantage to make sure you are giving that final product the effort and time that it deserves. Because as hard as you work on your design and as much information as you put in, if you cannot transfer it to a PDF or a actual physical drawing, all that effort was for nothing, right? Because your client won't be happy if you cut off half the drawing on their pages because you happen to forget to fit everything on the right size paper. And so let's just quickly change this space. So right now, let's change this to 11 by 17. Landscape, okay. So let's say this was our new space. Take my model space. That looks good. Let me get rid of that line actually. So let's say that's our model right there. That looks great. We can go ahead and plot this. And let's say our settings were only this. And I want to just go right to print, 1-to-1. I'm going to print this to Adobe. Say OK. Sure, let's call it that. Let's see. Stents. There we go. This is what I want to do. Let's go desktop. Oh, where's it? There we go. Does that look right? That does not match this, does it? All because of one setting that was overlooked, or a couple of settings depending on how you look at it. I've broken that drawing. It is no longer your complete drawing. So it's nice if you do have your full title block. It's very quick and apparent to see because you would have your full border. And if this was missing, I would hope that it's very easy for you to notice that it's broken and that you have not printed your full space. But again, it can happen. And although it is, like I said, sort of, it looks like a very simple menu of what you need to have done in here, it is still that important final step of understanding what each of these things does. So setting your paper size properly, setting your plot scale, and also what you're printing. Are you actually just trying to print your full layout? If so, that's good, right? That's everything I need to see in here. And we're okay. The other options, this type of stuff will only be important if it will really only be important if you have those types of layers and things already assigned that can affect it. So if you have different line weights, if you have transparencies, that is more managing your layer properties, right? That's where you can set your different line weights and things. This is where things will start to show up. Let's see. Oops. There we go. So right here, this is where under the Layer Properties Manager, you can actually modify your different line weights. So depending on what you need your plot settings to be, for example, you could make one of these a border line weight. You could make that one thicker. It would show up thicker. Let's make the blue one 0.3, for example, and we'll make this one 1. So my model has not changed, right? Everything in the model looks the same. But once you go to the plot setting, things look a little different now, right? Almost impossible to see, but that's how you would use those line weights. Those line weights matter at the end, once you've actually gone to your plot. Prior to that, they're not too important. They don't really affect your model space too much. There are ways to make your model lines thicker if need be, but this is sort of just the standard thickness, right, for your drawing. As you guys have seen throughout all the different models, whether it was an imported motor model or any of the drawings that we've just started from scratch, that sort of line thickness has been pretty consistent. It's only when you get to your plot setting where you may want thicker line weights for whatever reason. Usually it's borders, just like this. You do not actually have to have it drawn thicker in your model space. You can handle that all through your layer control. So that could be on a thicker layer through here. Instead of everything being layer 0, you can create layers that are border layers that are 2 mil thick. And getting back to what we were talking about with the redact. So let's say I'm just going to redact something here. Annotate. So let's say for whatever reason I want to hide that one view. Oops. When I go to plot, that's gone now. And there's no way to remove a redacted section, or sorry, wipeout in AutoCAD. But essentially that's redacting the information on your drawing package. So if you need to hide something, that is how you would do it. You would use your wipeout command and plot it away. So you either print it to paper or print it to PDF. But either way, when you go to print it, it's okay. Oops, I need to close that. It's okay. Write it. If I go to that actual file, let's open with Adobe. There is no way to actually hide that. Sorry, here we go. There's no way to hide that wipeout section. It is actually blocked from me from doing anything. So again, this is for hiding proprietary information or just hiding things you do not necessarily want your client to see at the time, or a subcontractor to see. Very minor command, but powerful if you need to hide things. And unfortunately, there are a lot of times when you do need to hide things, depending on your job role. Any questions about that? There are some other minor things, such as your print quality. That's getting just into refinement of your drawing. So sometimes you just need a very rough drawing, and you don't want to make it take up lots of ink or take a lot of time to print. So there's ways to downgrade your quality. This also affects your PDF sizes, depending on how high of a quality you're making your drawing package. If you're, for example, trying to save space for some reason. Typically, you do want to print at a fairly high quality. But in case you do need to drop your quality down, there are ways to drop the quality. And down here, there's actually ways to save this to your layout. So yes, there are ways to save your whole page setup, right, in different plot styles. But this can also save it just for this one layout, so that each time you come back to it, if you're doing multiple revisions on that one drawing, you're not going to have to worry about your
plot settings too much.
All right. Okay, let's just take a quick 10-15 minute break, and then we'll jump back into a few other things.